couple of my colleagues, River and Jennifer over here. For some reason, they decided to subject themselves to an hour plus of me running my mouth as if they don't get that enough on a day-to-day basis. And then obviously, I want to thank the Community Foundation for hosting us. The Community Foundation certainly obviously doesn't work in our community, but they also know how to get straight to my heart. They always say, like, the way to a man's heart is to his stomach. If you know me well, you know one of my favorite places is Chick-fil-A. In fact, when Jacob accepted the job here, I got a little surprise lunch delivery from Chick-fil-A as a, we're sorry. So anyway, hope you enjoy breakfast. We're going to try to talk about bridging the gap between development and accounting. I mean, I think this is a pretty important topic, you know, from the audit standpoint. There you go. There we go. Okay. So we're going to talk about some common disconnects, some examples, why bridging the gap is vital. How do you bridge the gap? And there's some questions. Just show of hands right now. How many accounting people are here? All right. So, half in, half out.
Can I qualify that? I'm in charge of philanthropy, but I'm also a chartered management accountant, so I'm kind of both.
All right. Does that mean the rest of y'all are development people? Good. Because that's actually the crowd we really want. Not that the accounting people aren't important, but development people, again, I'm not trying to pick on y'all, but where the disconnect tends to happen is on the development side, because things in your world, it's just different than our world. So good that a lot of the development people are in the room. Okay. Fancy little thing here, you know, development on one side, we got a little bridge, accounting on the other side. Okay. Some reasons for disconnect. Lack of collaboration partnership. How often as a development person, do you actually talk and interact with the accounting side of your organization? This much. Is that the same for everybody else? Yeah. Well, okay, that's good. So that's really one of the number one reasons for the disconnect is you just live in different worlds. And you just indirectly, subconsciously, you just don't think that y'all need to collaborate. But in reality, you do. Lack of understanding, accountants. Like, we don't understand how to raise money. The last thing I'm good at is going out and asking someone for money. Not something I want to do, not something I'm good at. And the last thing you want to do is sit down and do a bunch of debits and credits. We're both good at what we do, and we neither one of us really have a great understanding of what the other one does and how they do it. Lack of communication, again, it kind of ties into the lack of collaboration and partnership. You know, you need to talk more. Different terminology. So, development people in the room. What you may call a gift, we do not call a gift. What you would count towards a campaign goal, we would not count towards a campaign goal. And we'll get into some of those examples here shortly. So that's where some of it happens. Again, that kind of ties into the different set of rules. On the accounting side, we've got rules of when things can be counted as revenue contributions and when things can't. Again, for development purposes, you know, it's all a gift. It's all a gift all the time, right? Yeah, it's like we always joke in our firm that, you know, if I have, you know, Janine as a client, she's a nonprofit organization that goes toward my nonprofit revenue. Well, she also has the 990. Well, that's tax. That goes towards the tax revenue, you know? So therefore, we suddenly become a $300 million firm because we're triple counting revenue in all spaces, right? I feel like sometimes the development gets a little bit that way from my accounting brain, right? Everything's a gift and we're going to count, you know, suddenly the campaign goal was exploded. Accounting is viewed as secondary. And actually, I might even argue it's third. What's the number one goal in your organization? Yeah. Thank you. Absolutely, without fail, no doubt, mission is number one. I often think number two is fundraising and development. And accounting is third. So, I mean, anybody agree, disagree? No. All right. Why it's vital. By the way, this is meant to be as interactive as you guys want it to be. I can stand up here and talk the whole time, but it's kind of fun if we share some examples and kind of talk freely on some of this stuff. All right. Everyone within the organization shares a common goal of serving the mission and purpose of the organization. And when I say everyone, staff and board, right? Because in the nonprofit world, your board is technically your governing body, right? You know, as the CEO, you answer to the board. So everyone, board, staff, has a common goal of serving the mission and the purpose of the organization. It's very unhealthy to have a us versus them mentality. Again, everybody's there to achieve the same thing. Collectively, the teams are responsible for managing every gift received. Yes, it's development's responsibility to raise the money and steward that donor, but the rest of the organization has a responsibility as well. Because if development has led the donor to believe that I'm gonna use an example real quick. Somebody says, I put you in my will, and I left $10 million in my will to you when I die. They're 40 years old and they just sold a tech company. How quickly are they gonna die, right? But if that donor from communication from the development person is expecting to see that $10 million in the annual report of the organization as a gift, my world, that's not a gift. Because they can change their will the next day because they get mad at you because it didn't show up in the annual report, right? So again, collectively, the teams are responsible for managing every gift received. Consistent messaging, telling your organization's story to decision makers and stakeholders. Make sure everyone, and go back to everyone, board, staff, is telling the same story the same way. Yeah, because we all should have our elevator speeches, your 30-second elevator speech or whatever, because even your most junior staff person has friends and colleagues, right? You want them saying the same thing that the CEO is saying. Now, when it comes to media relations, obviously you want to restrict that pool, right? You don't only want so many people talking to the media. Again, personal story. I'm sure we all, if you've been in this town longer than 5 or 6 years, you remember the unfortunate accident with Snooty. I was the board treasurer when that happened. So we restricted all communications to Bernanke, the CEO. Nobody said anything to the media if it wasn't Bernanke, the CEO. So again, situations like that, you definitely want to restrict your storytelling, but generally speaking, everybody needs to be saying the same thing. Donor relations is crucial across all departments. Again, go back to my little $10 million, 40-year-old person in a will story. Make sure that donor knows everything. The last thing you want is donors getting mad at you. Not only are they going to restrict their future gifts, but they obviously have friends too. All right. Information sharing allows each team to be more efficient. So again, it goes all back to communication. In my world, as an auditor, if I come into your organization once a year and the only time you see and talk to me is once a year, probably not going to be an effective, efficient audit operation. Right? But conversely, if we're talking on a regular basis, it doesn't have to be, hey, I'm going to send you a calendar invite for every month, 3 o'clock on the second Tuesday. But if we're routinely talking throughout the year, there's no surprises on my end, there's no surprises on your end. Same thing holds true here. So always share information. Effectively communicating financial and program outcomes on public information, 990 watchdogs. All right, page 2 of your 990. What's page 2 of your 990? Your program service accomplishment area, right? That is your one area, really, in the 990 where you can literally do whatever you want. You can make it that skinny, or you can write a John Grisham book. Now, I would argue that nobody's going to read the John Grisham book, but that is your one area to toot your own horn. Because donors are all going to you can have an audit all day long, and 95% of donors would rather go to the 990 than go to your audit, right? It's just the reality. So on that page 2 of the 990, toot your own horn. Put your stats in there. You know, we helped 1,000 people stay in their homes. We helped 1,000 people with mental health counseling, you know, whatever the case may be. Use that to effectively communicate. All right. Now here's the fun stuff. Development, counting, different from accounting. Anybody use Razor's Edge and Financial Edge? You do? You do? So it's a really common program at virtually every higher, like college and related university foundation, alumni, they all use this product. It's a blackball product. Financial Edge is obviously the accounting side. Razor's Edge is the development side. And the two communicate, they integrate. Sometimes. Ideally, they're supposed to. But a lot of you, I'm guessing, are probably using QuickBooks, right? And if you're using QuickBooks, what are you using for your donor database? Something different than QuickBooks, right? Right. Does that something different from QuickBooks integrate with QuickBooks? Okay, that's good. It's actually good. It's positive. I didn't expect a lot of yes answers on that. A couple of common things that are different. You know, I already mentioned the will thing. You know, somebody leaves you $10 million in a will and they're 40 years old, even if they're 90 years old, right? They still change their will before they die. Even a contribution, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds. I mean, I don't know, Julia may love me getting into the weeds on accounting stuff, but contribution can either be unconditional or conditional. And in our world, conditional contributions do not get recorded until the conditions are met, right? If I go to an organization and say, I'm going to give you $5 million for your upcoming capital campaign. You're building a new building to serve teens. And I'm gonna give you $5 million when you break ground and you raise $5 million, right? Development, are you counting that towards your campaign goal?
I would.
Right?
I mean, yeah.
Yes.
Pledge, we call it pledge.
It's not a pledge. It's a conditional pledge because there are two conditions attached to it. One, you have to break ground. Yeah. And two, you have to raise $5 million. So until those two things happen in the accounting world, that is not a contribution. So you can record that $5 million in Razor's Edge all day long. And it ain't showing up in Financial Edge until those two conditions are met. Now, conversely, a restriction is different from a condition. Same example, I'm going to give you $5 million towards your building. Period. In a discussion. That's just a restriction. There's no strings attached to it, right? I'm giving it to you for the building, but I've not placed any strings or conditions on it. That one would end up in both places. It would be a pledge unless I actually stroked you the check. Now, in the example, if I stroked you the check and had the conditions, it would just be deferred revenue and not run through contribution revenue. So the two big ones are the conditional contributions and stuff in a will, you know, I left you in a will. The other thing that's very nuanced in this, same example, if I said to you, I intend to give you $5 million towards your capital campaign. Are you counting that towards your campaign goal? Why?
Because anything can happen.
What's the difference in I promised to give you $5 million?
You do it.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably use a pledge card or some type of writing and
What's
correspondence.
the pledge card say?
Yeah, how much they're gonna give and in what payment method and.
It's on a different slide, but words matter.
Sure.
Words matter. And in our world, the word intention is not a pledge. Because I can change my mind. If I say I promise to give you, or I pledge to you, it's absolutely a recordable contribution. If I say my intention is to give you this money, Well, I intend to take my wife to dinner tonight, but she may have other options, you know, she may have other plans, right? So it's not gonna happen. We're actually moving right now, so she probably wants us to pack. You know, so, yeah,
So it's something you said that triggered a question. So say you're raising money for your capital campaign. So therefore, the thought is, the restriction is that you're only gonna use the money for construction. So does that mean that it is deferred revenue until you use it? Okay, so in that instance.
unless there's like like a matching requirement or some sort of thing that says you gotta be 50% complete, or you gotta have the foundation laid, or, you know, some other measurable. About 4 or 5 years ago, they changed, well, I say they changed the guidance. The FASB says they clarified their always intended message to say that to defer the revenue and not record it, there has to be definitive, identifiable, what they call barriers to earning. And they further said that a generic right of return or a generic give us a report after you spend the money do not constitute a barrier to earning. So again, like in the capital campaign example. Yeah.
You don't build, you just send them refund.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So there has to be something definitely measurable about. So I'll get out of the capital campaign world and say, all right, I'm gonna give you $100,000. You're an organization that provides assistance to people that are either homeless or near homeless. Right? And I'm gonna give you $100,000 for your mission. Here's $100,000, go do what you do. Unrestricted contribution reported all day long. I'm gonna give you $100,000 to help the homeless in DeSoto County. Okay? Still a contribution, but restricted because you have to use it in DeSoto County. You can't use it in Manatee or Sarasota. I'm gonna give you $100,000 to provide rental assistance payments to single mothers whose spouses are in prison and have children. And I anticipate my 100,000 will help 100 people. That's a condition where the revenue is deferred, and you have to find that single mother of children whose husband is a significant other is in prison and help those 100 people. And you would recognize it as you help. So again, very nuanced, but 3 different answers. Yes, ma'am.
Can I give you another real life?
Sure. Yeah.
We just got a grant, a very large grant for property purchase.
Okay.
But that is only, that we will get the money wired if another large grant comes in.
Yeah.
So that's
Conditional.
conditional.
Yeah,
So
you gotta get the other one.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be part of that.
From an accounting standpoint, no. Now, from a development standpoint, you wanna record that crap all day long, because you wanna show the other grant, hey, we've got
Get
the,
the money.
we've got this over here, as long as you do what you're supposed to, you know.
So we can consider that as raised.
From a development standpoint, yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
You know, I'm certainly not, I mean, that's a good point. I'm certainly not saying development has to change their way of thinking to match accounting. I'm certainly not saying that at all. But I'm just, you know, it's just different. And as long as we all recognize the differences, you know, we can get around them. But yeah, no, you would absolutely, from the development standpoint, want to count that. Because you, again, gotta go raise the other grant to get the one. Otherwise you lose both.
That leverages the other one.
Correct. But from an accounting standpoint, neither one of them are gonna count until they both happen. Thank you.
I think there might be a question just over here.
That was earlier, I was still figuring out the razor's edge, financial edge. Something that correlates in with the actual account. I do QuickBooks and I'm just learning that still, so
Yeah, there's.
we just throw it all in there.
Sometimes it's easy when you have software, owner management software and financial software that interface and interact with each other. Sometimes it kind of muddies the waters a little bit. But, you know. Again, kind of the same thing, campaign goals track differently, again, towards your example you just gave. Again, as long as everyone knows and everyone communicates and is upfront, it shouldn't be a problem. This is a fun one. Special event profitability. And this is getting more of an issue because the IRS is, the one area the IRS is getting a little, quite honestly, I think the IRS is wrong, but yeah, it's just my opinion. On your 990, we all do special events, right? On your 990, everybody's got a Schedule G, which is the detail of the events. Okay. If you do a paddle raise at your event, is that event revenue? In the eyes of the IRS, no. It is not special event revenue and does not go on Schedule G. Technically. Now, again,
Campaign, right?
well, it's not really a campaign even because it's just literally like a 30-minute, it's a 30-minute campaign maybe, or however long it takes you to do your paddle race.
Brian.
Yeah,
Good development people know the paddle raise is gonna happen.
sure.
And so I would agree, the $50, the $100, the occasional $1,000 you didn't know was gonna happen.
Yeah,
But prior to that event that night, you already know.
you got a few
Who's
plans.
gonna do 5, who's gonna
Yeah, you
do
got-
10 in order to spur.
Yeah, you got. a
So
few
it's
plans.
all the work that happened 3 months
Sure.
beforehand to get those people there that night. So that's why I would say I wouldn't count it
Yeah.
towards that event's.
Sure,
revenue.
and that's essentially the stance the IRS takes. Now, again, in terms of your Schedule G and your 990, I completely disagree. Which is why, those of you in the room that I sign your 990s, we've always done Schedule G and counted it on Schedule G, because I just have a philosophical difference, and I'm like,
Yeah, Brian, then that's when you just decide not to do events anymore and you make it even better.
I'm gonna get to that a little bit later.
But to her point is that you're doing all the work to get sponsorships ahead of time, so that you wouldn't count that.
Sponsors are different than charitable.
Well, but sponsorships are slightly different. Because again, sponsorships in the eyes of the IRS are just nothing more than contributions with a different name. So.
Give them some goods and services. We get into this tricky.
Again, technically a sponsorship, you have to split between, essentially, if I sponsor your event for $10,000 and I get a table of 8 and my logo on all the advertising, right? What's the table of 8 worth?
The meal.
$1,000, right? The meal. But I've given you 10, right? What's the value of my logo on the materials? How do you quantify that? You really can't, right? So the IRS would say you have a $9,000 contribution and $1,000 of event revenue. Now, again, this is where I disagree, just because you wouldn't have gotten the $10,000 if you didn't have the event, so whatever. So special event profitability, technically, in the eyes of the IRS, Schedule G should almost always show a loss.
Oh.
Because the IRS says that paddle raise, those sponsorships, effectively, the cost of like when you send somebody the ticket, right? And you say, thank you for buying this $250 ticket. The value of your meal and entertainment is $75, right? The IRS basically says your only event revenue is that $75 a ticket. You have a silent auction. That's just contribution. Because the donor is getting nothing really back. I mean, they're paying for something, right? But effectively, you didn't pay anything to get the event that's in the silent auction, right? So you've got no cost. Therefore, it's really just a contribution.
Non-charitable contribution,
Non-cash.
non-charitable.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah, correct. Yeah, they can't deduct it. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just want.
Yeah, no, right. You technically can't deduct it. Unless the value is, unless the value is 4 tickets to the Marauders game that you can go buy at the box office for $5 a piece and they give you $500 for. Then you do have a little bit of a contribution in there. So technically, in the eyes of the IRS, your Schedule G on your 990s almost always should show a loss. Or best case scenario would be a net zero. And everything just shifts to contribution revenue. Now, again, historically, I've disagreed with that and I've ignored it. But sorry. But lately, I've decided that I probably shouldn't be doing that anymore. So I just wanted to point that out. Yeah.
So it's just the event tickets that are considered event?
I mean, every event's probably slightly different depending on what your event is, but generally speaking, that's the one thing that would be, is the way the form works on that Schedule G, you've got total event revenue, which would include everything. The paddle raise money, the silent auction money, the ticket sales, the sponsorships, all that, right? And then it says less contributions. Contributions get backed out. And you get down to, net event revenue. Then you back off your expenses, which your expenses are obviously what you're paying the venue, you're paying the caterer, you're paying the band, whatever the case may be, right? Which is why it always ends up coming up to a loss, because the overwhelming majority of the revenue, the special event in the eyes of the IRS, is contributions. And and the reason I've started changing my thinking on doing Schedule G differently is if they're truly contributions, right, they're subject to Schedule B disclosure. If they're on Schedule G as event revenue, they'll never show up on Schedule B. So in other words, if somebody comes to your event in a paddle raise and you're in the middle of a capital campaign and you announce the capital campaign at the event to kick off the public phase of your capital campaign, and you've got to plant the audience that's going to stroke a $5 million check, and they say, I'm doing $5 million, right? That person should absolutely show up on Schedule B of your 990. But if you don't back it out of Schedule G and count it as event revenue, it's never going to get up on Schedule B. And that's kind of why I've changed my way of thinking on preparing Schedule G going forward. Because in the past, that person would have never shown up. Schedule B, and that's really the more important thing is the Schedule B disclosure. Again, fun one. I think this happens. I mean, my perception is this one happens a lot. Signed agreements are not shared with the county. I think this is probably the single biggest reason why there's a disconnect in my mind, like in my perception. Development goes out to a donor pledges something, donor strokes the check, development walks in, hands the check to accounting. Accounting says, what is this? Oh, it's a contribution from Mr. Jones. What's it for? Oh, he just gave us a contribution. Accounting records it as a contribution revenue. Audit comes in, says, pulls it for a testing sample, say, we need to see the support from Mr. Jones's $25,000 contribution. CFO goes, okay, hey, development. Did Mr. Jones give us anything other than a check? Oh, yeah, I got an agreement. Well, can I see it? Lo and behold, Mr. Jones restricted his gift, but and nobody ever knew it because development didn't share it. They just said, here's the check. Because development just thinks, well, accounting just needs the daggone money. They don't need anything else. So again, it all goes back to the C word, communication. Jacob.
I think in that same vein, talking about grant agreements as well, whether it's with the county or whether it's with another donor, grants and contributions under FASB are synonymous with each other. And so, make sure you're sharing grant agreements, and before grant agreements are signed, accounting is looking through the language in there so they know what is coming down the pipeline as far as reporting, as far as timing of checks and all those things.
That's a good point. Yeah, in our world, contributions and grants are the same thing. In development world, and I keep looking at you because you're right in front of me and you're a development person. Is it the same thing if Manatee County gives you $1 million and I give you $1 million? In the eyes of FASB, it is the same exact thing. So, which is why Jacob's point of the grant agreements are important. And I go back to the comment I made a few minutes ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, the FASB kind of clarified the way everything's reported, because it's the government grants that everybody used to defer. Mostly the federal government grants, because the county and the city usually just gives money on an annual basis, right? But the federal government may say, okay, I got a client that does research, and virtually all their money comes from the federal government, NIH and HHS, and they're all on these 3-year grant cycles. They'll get grant agreements. Here's the amount we're going to give you over the next 3 years. Reimbursement-based grant, they spend the money every month, they send their request in, the government sends them the money. And in one particular grant, they give them all the money up front for the whole 3 years. Okay? It's a little smaller grant, but they get the whole 3-year grant money on day one of the 3-year grant cycle. Before the FASB clarified their standard, you kind of had the leeway in the standard, the way the standard was written and the way it was interpreted, to basically defer all that revenue and put it in monthly. Which is why the FASB came in and said, no, you got to have very measurable statistics, because the federal government's never going to restrict money. They're going to give you money for your program. They've deemed your program worthy and they're giving you money for your program, but they're not restricting it. They're not putting conditions on it. They've told you to report to us what you do. And if you don't spend it, give it back, which is again why they put in the clarified standard. Those two things are not barriers to earning. Okay? So in that example, from the federal government revenue, that you get it all on day one for a 3-year grant, it all goes into revenue day one.
If it's a reimbursable,
Reimbursable, completely different story.
okay.
You have to spend it first. So, but generally speaking, the government's paying you when you send them the reimbursement request. So Donor restriction issues. Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot that, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Speaking to the topic of the, not just presenting the check, having a signed agreement. Let's say you get an email, right, because this happens a lot, from a small foundation, a grant of, $5,000 to support whatever we requested. And, we want to give you the check at our award ceremony. And then, you do that whole thing and come back with a check, but there's really no signed agreement. Then what do you suggest for that?
What would, to me, I guess what would govern that would be two things. One, what you asked them for, what you asked them for. This is what we asked for. And then what that email response said. I mean, you can only audit what's there, right? You can only do with what you work with what you got. But you obviously asked them for something. You made an application to them for something.
Yeah.
And they responded to that application, whether it be to an email or whatever. And that's just, you just look to that and whatever's in that detail is what you would go with. I would argue that in most of those kind of cases, you're just asking for generic support for your program, right? I mean, we help kids, right? We got a program that helps, elementary school age kids. Can you help support that program? We'd love to help support that program, right? And you may give us some statistics. Hey, we're serving, 5,000 kids in Manatee County on a yearly basis, whatever, all 5,000 of these kids are below the poverty line, whatever. Great, that's a great mission. Here's your $5,000, right? Still kind of unrestricted because it's what you do all day, every day, but your kind of grant application and their email response would be all you have to go on. Voter restriction issues, we kind of talked about that. Gift acceptance. You got a question?
It's about the kind of multi-year upfront thing.
Yeah.
In a previous role, we had a grant that was like a third of our budget,
Yeah.
but it was over 2 years.
Yeah.
And treasurer was very concerned about 990 showing this big bump in revenue and then dropping down again. Is this something we have to deal with? You can't deal with that. What do you do?
I mean, it all depends on what the grant agreement says. I mean, the grant agreement may be written such that it would allow deferral over the 2-year period.
We just got to check.
Well, in that case, then, you just report it all as revenue and it is what it is. I mean, the IRS isn't going to raise a red flag on something like that in terms of big revenue, low revenue.
It was more for donors, donors looking at your 990.
Yeah.
Oh, you earned 400,000 last year and then this year and 300,000. Well, actually, because you spent 100,000 of that in the next year.
That's unfortunately, that's more of just a PR issue, not a whole lot you can do about it. Gift acceptance. I hope at this point in 2025, everybody has a gift acceptance policy. Yes? Does anybody not have a gift acceptance policy? Good. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. All right. Here's a fun one. UBIT concerns, unrelated business income tax. Now, some of you in your organizations may actually pay a little income tax. Most of you probably don't. And you're sitting there thinking in your brain right now, we're a nonprofit, we don't pay income tax. Oh, but you could. And the one that trips everybody up, the nuanced difference between a sponsorship and advertising. For the IRS purposes, a sponsorship is never taxable. Advertising is always, without fail, no questions asked, do not pass go, do not collect $200 taxable revenue. And the difference is so minor. So your special event, right? You do a little program book for your special event. You put ads in your special event program book. I'm gonna use the word ad for right now, right? You put those ads in there. The IRS says if that ad does nothing but say Malden and Jenkins, 1401 Manatee Avenue West, 941-741, 2229, mjcpa.com. If that's all it says, it's a sponsorship. It's not an ad. You're fine. If that further went on to say it had all that same information, but it said, bring this in for a free tax consultation. You've now crossed the line into advertising, and whatever I paid you for that is 100% taxable revenue. Now, get to accounting knows this, or at least knows enough to pick up the phone and call me and say, hey, Development, you got no clue, do you? So you're out there working with me. Hey, Brian, you've got a half page in our program book. Just send me your ad. And I say to you, okay, well, I'll send you to my marketing people. They'll help develop the ad, right? And marketing on that company. Now, in my company, we're very careful not to put that sort of stuff, because we're not gonna give away free tax consultations, but you know, be that as it may, we know we'd cross the line into advertising. Let's say you got a real estate agent. Those are fun ones, right?
Does it have to be a coupon though?
It doesn't have to be a coupon. That's the thing. That's where I was fixing to go with my real estate agent example. Real estate agents, you know, they love to advertise themselves because that's how they get listings, right? They may say, Brian Carter, Remax Realty. I'm the #1 agent in Manatee County 3 years in a row for Lakewood Ranch. Nobody sells a house faster than I do. Advertising, not a sponsorship, because they've now tooted their own horn. So development, unbeknownst to them, has created taxable revenue for the organization.
This might be a silly question, but does it have to be, is there a difference between print and digital?
No. No difference whatsoever. So again, as I said at the very start, I'm glad development people are in the room, right? Because that is the one area where at the end of the day, the $2,000, you know, you got for that, you know, ad in the program book is what really matters. But unbeknownst to everyone other than accounting, you created taxable revenue for it. And the business did. Now the last thing the business wants to do is create taxable revenue for you, right? That's the last thing they want to do. But they had no idea. They're just putting their ad in, right? So I think you were first.
So if you announce you have scholarships, is that considered like couponish?
Give me an example.
You say, okay, we have a small school, we open enrollment, scholarships available.
No, I think that's probably fine. I mean, just off the cuff, I think that's probably fine. Because you're kind of saying what you do. Like if you're just Mullen and Jenkins CPAs, right? It's just kind of saying what I think you're probably fine, but it's getting a little close. It's getting a little close. It's tricky.
I had a similar question. Let's say if it's so those are for like businesses or real estate agents. If it's a nonprofit organization who is then sponsoring another nonprofit organization's event, and then it comes with some sort of space and they're promoting.
That's a good.
Same question.
Like,
They're still.
I don't think there's any distinction in that, honestly. So like, we'll use Janine as an example, right?
We're gonna.
She sponsors something in your program book that says, bring this in for 3 free tickets to our next show. I think she's created taxable revenue for you.
Even if her organization is a
Is it a
nonprofit.
I think it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant.
So Brian's gonna find out though, right?
Yeah.
Real.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think, like, again, my off the cuff answer is I think that still creates taxable revenue. Because it's promoting her organization, business, whatever, and enticing people to come to her place of business. Because at the end of the day, you're a nonprofit, but you're still a business.
Or
Right?
are you supporting another mission?
Well, I don't think that matters in this case, but again, that's a good one. J.T., write that down.
Yeah.
That down.
And then send me the response, and we send those ads out to everybody we partner with.
That's what they were calling.
Didn't know how to say it.
We did that your way.
Oh, sorry, yeah, but nonprofit sponsors another nonprofit, but puts one of those ad type things in, is that still taxable revenue? I'm gonna look that one up, I'll let you know, that's a good one.
What if you have a special event and
We're in that situation.
like a magazine or something gives you an in-kind sponsorship to like their magazine or something like that, that is not taxed, right?
Fine.
Okay, I just want to make
That's
sure.
fine, that's fine, yes, ma'am.
The 80% of Google ad grants, so they give the nonprofits $10,000 worth of search ads, is that taxable?
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think that's the thing. That's something you would otherwise pay for, right? So effectively, you're reporting the revenue and you're reporting an expense at the same time. All right, I told y'all that was a fun one. Who knew accounting could be fun, right? Okay, we've kind of beat up this last two. All right, this is where I said, contributions and grant standard. Words matter. Promise to give versus intention, I already talked about that. Another one, hey, for your budget and planning purposes, this is what I'm gonna do. Development would count that all day long, right? You know, cause you know you're gonna, you wanna build a new building, right? And you got one donor that gives you $1 million a year, every year for the last 10 years, right? You go to that donor and say, Mr. Jones, we're really thinking about building a new building, we've outgrown our space, we need to either build or buy, what are you thinking? Well, for your budgeting purposes, I'll up my million to $1.5 million, right? You're gonna be like, you're gonna go back to the CEO and say, hey, Mr. Jones just gave us another $500,000 a year, for accounting purposes, yeah. Verbal versus written agreements, this one's tough. Because in our standards, it says you can actually record a pledge off a verbal agreement. As an auditor, I don't know how the hell I audit that. That's one thing you can do is call a donor, right? But then what if donor is, out of the country? What if donor is in the hospital? What if you say, this donor's anonymous? I don't know how you audit that. So my only comment here is try not to do anything verbal, try to get everything in writing, at least an email. Or for crying out loud, save a voicemail or something, I don't know.
Or follow up with an email and have them respond.
Yeah, exactly, something like that. Yes, ma'am. You have a question? I didn't know if this was.
Yeah, lots.
Okay. Some of this is just blowing your mind. Well, it's taken me almost 30 years to figure some of this stuff out. With and without donor restrictions, I think we talked about that. We talked about that up front. The organization is in my will. When does development count that versus accounting? Again, development's going to count it the day I say you're in my will. Accounting's not going to count until I die. Revocable versus irrevocable. If I say you're the named beneficiary of a trust. If it's an irrevocable trust, that's great. We can be in agreement. We'll both record that one. If it's an irrevocable trust. If it's in a revocable trust, same thing as a will. Can't record it.
But even lately, you see people somehow being able to change their CRUTs. Beforehand, you couldn't.
Yeah.
Now they're changing their CRUTs, and if you count it, then you're taking it out.
Right. Now I'm gonna get on my soapbox a little bit on CRUTs. I hate them.
Hence, we don't count them until you actually die and we get a check.
It's a very technical term. I hate it, but and the reason I do, now there are situations where take them all day long. If Mr. Jones comes to you and he's 80 years old, he says, I'm gonna give you $5 million in a CRUT and I want $1,000 a month until I die, take that all day long. That's fine, right? If Mr. Jones comes to you at 60 years old and said, here's $50,000, I want $1,000 a month until I die, but invest it and do what you want to with it. When I die, you can have what's left over. Tell him thanks, but no thanks. Because I actually had a client probably been 10 years ago now. They had 2 CRUTs where the donors well outlived their life expectancy and the money was almost out. And I said to the CEO, I said, you might want to go to Mr. Jones and Ms. Smith and get them to just try to undo this and unwind it and give you money. Why? We're almost out of money. We'll just stop paying them. Oh, no, can't do that. Go read the agreement. You're on the hook till they die. She goes, well, what if we run out of money? I said, you better go out and fundraise. So that's why I hate them. Because most people aren't going to give you $1 million at 80 years old in a CRUT. They're going to give you $50,000 a year when they're 60 and think they're doing something positive for you, but want 3%, 4%, 5%, whatever it is back every quarter, every month, whatever the case may be. So that's why I hate them. So I've seen too many instances where the donor outlives. Yes, ma'am.
CRUT.
Charitable remainder unit trust. All right. That just means you've never taken one, so that's good. Keep it that way. Further complications, we talked about capital projects, campaign goals versus cash needs. So here's a good question. I think I got it on another slide later too. In your campaign, we all take pledges, right, toward the campaign. How long do you let people run their pledges out? On what?
who it is, what's backing them, and the size of the gift.
Fair enough.
Normally, they're only 3 years.
Okay. Fair enough. Anybody go longer than 3 years on a pledge? 4? Okay. I'll ask you a question. You're building a new building. And I agree to give you $10,000 towards your building, but I'm gonna pay it over 4 years, 2,500 a year for 4 years. Okay. When I make that pledge, you're already halfway done with construction. It's gonna take you another 10 months, let's just say, to make construction. I'm still gonna owe you 5 when the building's done. Where are you getting the cash to finish the project? Because you've now let me string my pledge out for 3 years longer than you actually need to get the money to build the project.
Our campaign's capacity building one, so it's not.
Okay, well, yeah, okay, that's fair enough, yeah, that's fair enough. That's fair enough.
I see the point.
But that's my overall point with this campaign goal versus cash needs. If,
You need 2 thermometers nowadays.
Right.
You really have to have 2 thermometers, because you even have, when we built the Performing Arts Center, Kiwanis pledged us $1 million. They wanted it in the newspaper the following day, you want $1 million, but it was $100,000 a year for 10 years. So you still had to go to the next donor and say, we still have $800,000 above, and they're like, no, you just got $1 million yesterday. Well, I can only count 200,000 of it in cash, because the campaign will be done by then, and we need another 800 now, paper bills.
correct, that's my overall point here, is be cognizant of what you're raising money for. And don't let someone pledge and string it out longer than you're actually gonna need the cash, when you need the cash. Now, again, everything's got an exception. Somebody says, I'm gonna give you $10 million, and I'm gonna pay it out over 5 years, $2 million a year. Probably fine, right? But just don't get on some sort of campaign, don't take a bunch of small pledges that get strung out for 4 or 5 years when you actually need the cash over 2 years. All right, naming rights. Does it align with gift acceptance policies? Do you do your due diligence? Are they written? Here's just a couple examples. The due diligence point. Let's say that you build a new building, and I'm just gonna go back a few years. Hugh Hefner's still alive. And Hugh Hefner comes to you and says, I really like what you do. I'm gonna give you $10 million, but I want it to be named the Hugh Hefner Playboy Center for Homeless. Again, it's a wild example, right? But would you take it? Because it's $10 million. $10 million. Yeah. What if he just said it's the Hugh Hefner Center for Homeless? Would you take it? I guess. So that's where I'm going. But I'll go back, and the gift acceptance policy is coming up in a few slides. But again, those are the sort of things you need to be thinking about. Something I saw just, we've all heard in the news, if you've watched the news at all, and you got a big, beautiful bill that's got all these tax provisions supposedly in it. There's actually a few things that actually affect nonprofits in the big, beautiful bill. One of them is they're proposing in this bill on naming rights, if you're a private college or a private foundation, naming rights are now taxable revenue to the tune of 21% tax.
Wow.
Now, again, nobody here is a private foundation or a private college, but so, and you're talking generally speaking, you can see here, UF got $20 million, Kansas got 50 million, these are big gifts. But that's just, again, that's something that's in the bill. Who knows? We'll see if it happens. The other 2 things that are in the bill, I know this is kind of a side note. Private foundations, their current excise tax on undistributed investment earnings is 1.39%. They're raising that to up to 10. 5% kicks in at 250 million of assets, and 10% kicks in at 5 billion of assets. So again, go 1.39% to 5%, not a big deal. And then the other one that really is kind of irrelevant, but it is in there. Currently, if you have any paid employees that make over $1 million a year, you have to pay an excise tax on the excess over $1 million. And only the top 5 employees making over $1 million are subject to that. So if you had 7 people making over $1 million, the 2 lowest Does anybody in here pay anybody over $1 million a year? We all like to be paid over $1 million a year. For that one. So they're actually expanding, yes, true first world problems, right?
Question, Brian, I know it may sound funny, but would that include deferred
Yes.
revenue?
Deferred comp, yes,
Deferred comp?
absolutely does.
So if somebody's making $750 a year and they're deferring comp their last 5 years, it could
So I'll give
go
you,
over the million.
I'll give you a real life
It's
example.
not me, guys. I'm just asking. I sit on a high, very large nonprofit board,
Yeah.
so I'm very curious
No.
about that question.
Yes, so this, I'll give you an example as to where somebody gets caught in that. So again, client of mine, statewide organization. CEO made decent money, right? Not obscene money, but decent money considering what they did. For his 30-year employment, they had money in a deferred comp plan, right? Separate from 401k, it was a deferred comp plan. And the day he retired, he just got that chunk of money. Well, it's reportable as compensation to him when he gets it. Okay? And because it's reportable as compensation when he got it, it's compensation for the 990. Well, the year he retired, he got it the day he retired, which obviously was the last day of the fiscal year, which he got his full salary that year, right? And just by blind luck and the investment, in the market, it was that much under $1 million, and he didn't have an issue. But that's where in our world here, people might get tripped up if you have a big deferred comp plan for your executive or something. Yes, ma'am.
So this is all in legislation right now?
Correct. Yeah, nothing's been
So
passed yet.
Nothing's been passed,
Correct. No.
okay.
No.
Is that what those called naming rights?
No. This is a sidebar on because the naming rights triggered what I saw last night in the tax legislation that they were going to start taxing this stuff. So no, it's all me.
Is there an organization that tracks legislation for nonprofits?
Yeah, they tend not to put anything out until it's done. I actually saw, I try not to talk about it until it's done because, again, it hadn't even made it out of the final committee in the House yet, right?
Okay, all right.
So it's still a long way to go. But if you follow Susie Bowie on social media, she posted something last night with a link to some of this. Susie Bowie. Selby. She used to be the CEO of this organization. But she posted something last night, which is where I saw it. And then I went and did a little research on my own outside of the article she shared. But that $1 million compensation thing right now is top 5. Legislation's taking it to everybody. So again, if you have more than 5 people making $1 million in your organization.
So I'm sorry, Brian. So right now, as of today, if you make over $1 million, there is an excise tax on.
On the excess. Yes. Yes, there is. Now, again, I don't have any clients that have it, but I think it's more of like these national orgs, National Red Cross, things like that.
There is an organization, I'm gotta go back about it, National Council of Nonprofits.
Yes.
National Council.
They're tracking federal, they provide federal updates about what's going on.
Thank you.
National Council of Nonprofits.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah, no.
new and I'm
No, you're
just.
good. You're good. Endowments. How many people have endowments? Yeah. Do you set minimums for your endowments? In other words, if I come to you and say, I want to establish the Brian Carter Help the Kids endowment, do you have a minimum that I need to donate to you to establish that endowment? Okay. Okay. All right, now I'm going to ask you a question. If I give you 25,000 and say, obviously, because it's an endowment, you can never spend my 25. You can only spend the earnings off my 25. Is 25 going to give you anything of substance to do anything with? No. And how many years is it going to take that 25 to grow without spending anything to actually make it meaningful?
Get a few 25s though, it makes a difference.
Few 25s for the same thing, right? But what if Jacob says, I want to give you 25 to fund operations of your building because I know you moved into a new building and operations are more expensive now because you went from 3,000 square feet to 10,000 square feet and your power bill and everything else. So I want to help you fund operations. I want to fund children's programs in elementary school. You got 225 endowments. Neither one of them are going to do anything for you, right? So if you have endowments, I encourage you to set higher minimums than you probably currently do. Because again, the endowment, you can't spend the corpus. You can only spend the earnings. So the endowed chair thing is more of an education type stuff. Administrative fees, if you're taking administrative fees, like what do y'all think, 1%, 2%, something like that. Make sure you disclose them. They're fine to do, but just make sure you disclose them. There you go. All right, in-kind contributions. This is kind of tied into the gift tax. Sometimes in-kind contributions have extra cost incurred. Can you use for the mission as well? We got some nice, cool pictures up here, right? Julia, if I came to you and say, I got a bunch of cows, I'm going to donate all my cows to you. Are you going to take them? That right? Exactly. You can't do anything with cows. You got to sell them to actually do something with them, right? Right, perfect, right, yeah. You know, or we've all probably got snowbirds as donors, right? Mr. Jones comes to you and say, you know, I'm going to be moving to Bradenton full time. You know, we're getting older. We don't want to make the trek back and forth to Wisconsin anymore for the summer. We're just going to be here full time. I'm going to, you know, the house in Wisconsin's been paid for 30 years. It sits on 20 acres and we got, you know, 50 head of cattle. I'm just going to turn the deed over to you and you guys can do what you want to with it. All right. But if you don't have a gift acceptance policy, how do you tell them no without making them mad? Right? Now, the answer is if Mr. Jones really wants to support your organization, he'll sell his house and sell his cows and just give you the money. Right? But again, if you're going to take in-kind contributions, consider the extra cost, consider if you can actually use it or not. You know, consider if it actually supports your mission. Okay. Developments, communications with donors. How are we doing on time? Yeah. Developments, communications can lead to complexity when trying to close the gift. This is where some of those things at the last minute, the donor says, well, I want to make a little tweak to my gift. You know, I saw this in the news. I want to do this, whatever. Just again, it all goes back to communication. Next to last bullet points actually flipped, converting in-kind contributions to cash. Do you really need them? Negotiating payment terms. We already talked about the length of pledges.
One thing on in-kind, there's a big disconnect between what in-kind is between development and account. And so especially when somebody says, I want to be your DJ and I'm a DJ and I'm going to be your DJ at your gala. And then they expect to get some tax letter that says that they get a tax write-off for their services. And it's like, no, thank you for coming and doing that. Yeah. And so as far as what you can actually, you know, count as in-kind, and we have people that, you know, like want to donate, you know, they do quilts and blankets and all of those sort of things. And we call it in-kind, yeah, kind of, but it has to be strictly something that, like our intern hours for, you know, social workers. Those
yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of, so your DJ example, you could actually probably get away with that one because you'd actually have to otherwise pay for it, right? Now on your books and records, it's a net zero to your P&L because you're going to record, you know, event expense for $500, whatever his normal fee is, and record revenue. But technically, you could send him. If I were you, I'd potentially report if I had a bunch of that or somebody asked. But the letter I sent him would say, "Thank you for DJing at our event. We understand that you charge $100 an hour and you were here for 3 hours. Therefore, we appreciate you not charging us the $300 you otherwise would have," or something like that, right? And then what he does on his 1040 is his business, right? But your intern stuff, yeah, that's all fine. Now your silent auction items, right? I wouldn't report anything for that. I mean, I'd report what you get paid, you know, by the person at your event that's, you know, paying for it, but you don't really have a contribution and an expense and then a purchase. You just have a purchase. Okay, we already talked about this quite a bit. In the interest of time, we'll keep moving. Exchange versus contribution. We talked about advertising versus contributions. Okay. Again, communication. President, CEO, executive staff, other leadership team. Again, we already talked about telling the story with the IRS on page 2. You got your website. You know, make sure your website is as robust as you want it to be. because that's the other place. I mean, you're really free to do whatever you want on your website. Attendance at board meetings. Does finance and development go to your board meetings? Okay, good. They should. Make the periodic meetings. Yeah, again, it all goes back to communication. Everyone should understand their role and value. Yeah, not a no, we can't do this approach. Yeah, if you've been a client long enough, you've probably heard me tell you no at some point. No, you can't do that, or no, that's not appropriate. But I always try to find an alternative solution. No, but. So don't be too negative. Everybody work closely together on the creation of the strategic plan, and annual budget, and the key performance indicators. That's just software stuff. All right, gift policy. Manages donors' expectations, preserves their relationships when gifts are rejected. In other words, my snowbird with the 20 acres in Wisconsin with 50 head of cattle. Can serve as guidance for board members who are either asking for or getting gifts. Depersonalizes things that are on the front line, and that prevents donors from making mistakes too. The 990 actually asks whether you have a gift acceptance policy. It's in that whole 3 or 4 pages worth of yes/no questions. And you probably realize this, but the IRS uses those yes/no questions in their system as little triggers. If you have way too many no's on things, you'll go over in this little side bucket. And that's when you may get a knock on your door by the IRS. So we want to try to have as many yeses on those as we can. Now, some of them legitimately can be no, like, do you pay insurance benefits on a personal benefit contract? You want that one to be no, right? But a gift acceptance policy, you want that to be a yes. So on all those questions, really you want yeses. Let's try to make sure we can get yeses. Your gift acceptance policy should encourage legal advice. I don't know about y'all here now, Jacobs, that you've kind of broken away, about to break away from Sarasota, but you know, Betsy Pennywell at the Sarasota Community Foundation, you know, she's a great resource from a legal standpoint. So use legal advice when you can, if you have to. Let's see, mission and purpose. You've all got gift acceptance policies. So and we can share these slides. Jacob's got them. So someone here can just share the slides after the fact with the attendee list. So these are just all important things that you should have in your policy. If you don't, you might want to update it. Committee. Actually, if I want to spend a minute here. Cash is obviously cash. Tangible personal property, houses, things like that. Obviously, you either need to be using them in the mission. Something like, let's just say you're Meals on Wheels, right? And you need a van, right? To deliver meals. That's a tangible personal property you accept all day, every day, right? Marketable securities. I hope your policy is you sell them and convert them to cash and do whatever you do per your investment policy as quickly as possible. So that's just timing of the gift, timing of the transfer, timing of the sale. Because the contribution technically is the fair market value on the date the contribution is made, not the day you sell it. So if I gave you the money today, I gave you 1 share of Berkshire Hathaway stock. God, I wish I had 100 shares of that, but let's just say it's worth $100,000. That's my contribution. But if you hold on to it for a week, and it's gone up to 150, my contribution is not 150. You made 50,000 on my contribution of 100.
That's a question.
Yeah, sure.
When we say thank you to the donor,
Yeah,
are we supposed to just give the fair market value or give the high and low?
what I would probably do.
Supposed to be that, right? You have to record, when
Yeah.
you got the information, you have to record the highest, the lowest, and it's the average for the day
The
that was
average for the
left
day,
there.
yeah.
So you have-
Conflicting advice on whether you just give the donor the high and low, or whether you give them the average, because
More information can't hurt you. Because again, it's your responsibility to communicate, to acknowledge the gift to the donor, right? Thank you for your 1 share of Berkshire Hathaway stock on, May the 21st, 2025. The high value, low value, and average for the day of the share price was this. Call it a day.
Average as well.
I would do it just because again, more information is not bad.
And
But then
it's
it
the
gets
day-
on them to do whatever, it's not your responsibility for their tax return, so.
And Brian, it's the day it left there.
Correct.
It's not the day you might have received it, because if they sell it on a Friday and you don't get it until a Monday,
Yeah, correct.
it's, you have to go back to the day it actually.
That's right.
Not the day you receive it, it's the day it left them.
Correct. That's right. Closely held securities, again, this is stuff like, if I gave you my partnership interest in Malden and Jenkins. I don't know why I would do that, but if I did, yeah, that's what that one is. Malden and Jenkins might actually not be happy with that. Real estate, again. Can you use it? What's the value? Life insurance, charitable gift annuities, Bitcoin. I bet you, does your gift policy talk about Bitcoin and other virtual currency?
Yeah.
We don't even talk.
Right, you don't talk about it, but what if I came to you and said, I want to give you 100 Bitcoin? What would you do?
But then we would talk about it.
All right, but you don't, see, I want to give it to you, and you say, I don't want it, right? I don't want it. But your gift acceptance policy doesn't talk about it, so you can't, you don't really have a way to say no. So go update your gift acceptance policies for crypto. And when you do update your policies for crypto, make sure you say we're liquidating them like the day before we can, like literally you can't liquidate that stuff fast enough, in my opinion. Those things scare the bejeebus out of me. That's part of the nature of being an accountant, being like not very risk averse, very risk tolerant. My financial advisor actually told me it was a pyramid scheme. That all crypto is just a pyramid scheme. He had a much more vulgar description for it that I won't share, but basically a pyramid scheme. Appraisals. All right, so this is a good one. If someone gives you something that's non-cash, right? So let's just say that house, right? And you accept the house and you accept the fact that we're going to sell it for you. Whenever you're 90 years old, Miss Jones, you've gone into Freedom Village. We'll go ahead and bear the burden of selling your house, et cetera, right? If the value of the gift is non-cash and it's over $5,000, the donor has to attach an appraisal to their tax return. Who's going to bear the cost of the appraisal? The donor or you? Make sure you put that in your gift acceptance policy so that you can say to the donor, here's our policy. We don't pay for the appraisals, you do. Or if you want to pay for them, fine, you put that in there too. And then if it goes over, and like they're supposed to give you that form that they have to file with their tax return, you're supposed to sign it saying that you use the property for charitable purposes, et cetera, et cetera. And then if it's over, I forget what the dollar amount is, maybe 100 grand, I think, the appraisal actually has to get attached to the tax return, to the donor's tax return. So again, that's why I think to me, it's the donor's responsibility to get the appraisal. If it's over a certain dollar amount, they have to attach it to their tax return anyway. So why would you pay for something that's really their responsibility in their tax filing? Talk about legal acknowledgement gifts. Okay, make sure it's tailored for your uniqueness. Appropriate balance of flexibility and discipline. You can post it to your website. Right? That's actually an easy way. You say, donor could say, well, I never knew. It's been on our website for 3 years. You donated through the website. All right. We've had some good discussion. Certainly appreciate all your attentiveness and all the discussion. Any other things we want to talk about? I mean, technically we have 15 minutes or so. Hello.